member of the BIC. I receive at an average about 6 or 7 mailers from the BIC a week. But the moment I received the one announcing Mr. Brearley's talk this evening, I obviously marked it as priority and forwarded it to my dad, from whom I've got a love for cricket, which I believe is the case with Mr. Brearley as well. It's a great pleasure to introduce to you, though really no introductions are in order, Mike Brearley, who is a retired English first-class cricketer who captained Cambridge University, Middlesex, and England. He captained the international side in 31 of his 39 tests, winning 17 and losing only 4. If only Mike Atherton had such luck. He was the president of the MCC in 2007-2008. Since his retirement from professional cricket, he has pursued a career as a writer and psychoanalyst, serving as president of the British Psychoanalytical Society from 2008 to 2010. He is married to Mana Sarabhai, who we welcome this evening, and they have 2 children together. Mr. Brearley was educated at the City of London School, where his father Horace, himself a first-class cricketer, was a master. The book, in fact, is dedicated to Mr. Horace Brearley. While at St. John's College, Cambridge, Mike Brearley excelled at cricket. He was then a wicket-keeper batsman. After making 76 on his first-class debut as a wicket-keeper, he played for Cambridge between 1961 and 68, captaining the side from 1964 onwards, first as an undergraduate and then as a postgraduate. While still at Cambridge, he was chosen for the MCC tour to South Africa in 1964-65 and to captain the MCC under-25 side in Pakistan in 1966-67, when he scored 312 not out against the North Zone, which is his highest first-class score. He also got 223 against the Pakistan under-25 side and ended the tour with 793 runs from 6 matches at an average of 132. Ladies and gentlemen, please show your appreciation for Mr. Mike Brearley. In conversation, again no introductions, Ramachandra Guha, a member of the BIC, a historian and biographer, and importantly a cricket lover and cricket writer. He has taught at the universities of Yale and Stanford, held the Arne Næss Chair at the University of Oslo, and been the Indo-American Community Visiting Professor at the University of California at Berkeley. His books and essays have been translated into more than 20 languages. In 2009, he was awarded the Padma Bhushan, which we know is our 3rd highest civilian honor. Ladies and gentlemen, Ram Guha. And coming in at first drop, Suresh Menon, author and columnist, a cricket lover himself, one of India's youngest newspaper editors with the New Indian Express, a Bangalore University topper. Suresh Menon started with the Deccan Herald before moving to Indian Express, Chennai. In his 20s, he became sports editor of the Undivided Indian Express in New Delhi. He is currently editor of the Wisden India Almanac, called The Bible of Cricket, and contributing editor at The Hindu. His books include Bishan, Portrait of a Cricketer, which was incidentally discussed at BIC some years ago, and Pataudi, Nawab of Cricket. Ladies and gentlemen, Suresh Menon. As for the book, those of you who have not picked it up as yet, please do so on your way out. Mike Brearley on cricket. Of course, you're going to hear about it, but rarely ever would you have heard a cricket book being described as endlessly curious and unapologetically intellectual. I'm quite certain if there's a book written on the IPL, this may not be the description. BIC takes its protocol very seriously. Please do switch off your cell phones during the conversation and have a pleasant evening.
can someone hand the great Erapalli Prasanna a copy of the book? Can you please come and join us for the photograph? Just come here. Greatest hospital who ever lived, who had a legitimate action. But in this room, the person who led Karnataka to its first Ranji Trophy trial. Thank you,
Thank you. Thank you all for being here this evening. This is an evening I've been looking forward to for a while now. And I'll just go straight into it. While we were walking in, a gentleman asked Mike, there are 3 of Mike's books that are available outside, each one a classic. And somebody asked Mike, which of your books do you recommend? Well, not quite Sophie's Choice, but Mike asked him, what is your interest? So that's one way of looking at it. My argument is that these 3, 2 of them are already classics of cricket writing, and the new one on cricket, which we're talking about today, will soon join that lot. So my recommendation is that you pick up all 3, or you'll regret it for the rest of your life. When an author writes about cricket, and when he goes back and reconnects with some of his earlier writings, a lot of that is informed by what happened later. And a lot of that is important because it's necessary to know, to look at the thread. It's necessary to understand how a particular thought came into being, or a particular conclusion came into being. The wonderful thing about Mike's book, Mike's writing, is that where there are areas where he doesn't know something, he has the security, he has the self-confidence to say so. And that's something that cricket writers like myself, professional cricket writers, ought to learn from. On Cricket is a book which is divided into various chapters, and I should just jump into one of them straight away. The chapter on Indian cricket, of course, where Mike discusses players Ranji, Pataudi, and Virat Kohli. And Sachin Tendulkar. Gosh, we've already forgotten. My apologies to Sachin. There is a thread running through this. Is there? And I start by asking Mike this question: What is the Indianness, as opposed to? Is it politically correct these days to say that there is an Indianness in Indian cricket, as there is an Englishness in English cricket? There's an Australianness in Australian cricket. Is that something that, or is that something we impose on their cricket post the event or post the particular situation?
Well, first of all, thank you for inviting me, and you all for inviting me. And I look forward to this evening very much too, to be with these 2 people up here and with you all. So thank you very much. Now, yes, I think there are characteristics of countries, both in their sport and in their personality and their style of being, but it's easy to impose as well. It's easy to assume that they have to be like that, even if they're not. I mean, I don't think you'd call Rahul Dravid, great player that he was, a completely characteristically Indian batsman. He could have been an English batsman, probably, or possibly even an Australian one. Certainly, I think he could have been a great English batsman. I mean, I do like that story by Ashish Nandi, that quote of his, that cricket is an Indian game accidentally discovered in England. So, yes, I mean, obviously, what one thinks of is fluidity, wristiness, a sort of litheness, of Indian batsmen in particular, perhaps bowlers too. Englishmen are stiffer, more rigid, I think, which is almost the same thing. I do like the story that I quote in the book, which is of a Yorkshire cricketer whom I'd never heard of except in this context. He's called Ted Wainwright, a medium fast bowler, who said of Ranjit Singh, the first great Indian batsman that anyone knew of in England from 1893 to 1903, that he never played a Christian stroke in all his life. So, you know, we tend to think of anything that's a bit different from what we're used to as blasphemous or irreligious or not proper, to say the least. So I think, you know, there's always been that suspicion of something that's different from ourselves. But it's also vital to learn to play cricket in the way that you can play cricket. I mean, Tom Cartwright, a great friend of mine, whom I also wrote about in the book, an English, very characteristic English bowler. Medium paced, extremely accurate, a craftsman, proud of his craft, who once, of whom it was said, I think, I don't think he said this, and it wasn't, he didn't say this, but it was said of him that like in, as in George Eliot's Middlemarch, work is poetry without the poet. In other words, the standards of work, of craftsmanship, of pride in your work. Now, I've forgotten the link I was making with Tom Cartwright. What was I saying that was like?
About the Englishness of classicism.
Yes. Yeah. Well, I can't remember what I was going to say. But he was a very English bowler. I mean, very, very different from Praz, very different from Indian quick bowlers. So there's something about this liveness and smoothness and wristiness. And it's not just Indian. I think it's also Sri Lankan. Jayawardena, for example, makes me think of the same sort of thing. Laxman, Azharuddin. Yeah.
In the earlier book, you had talked about, the book on form, you had talked about the difference between being in form and being in the zone, which I found fascinating. Could you elaborate on that?
I think being in the zone is like everything feels right to you. You feel you're flowing. You feel you can do things without having to think about them at the time. It comes through you. You're a kind of medium for something, rather than a person struggling to do the best you can, working at it, you know, conscientiously and so on. Being in form is, but being in the zone is dangerous. You can be without caution, without care. You can get so that you think you can do anything at all. Whereas being in form is more a long-term thing. You can't be on form for a stroke. You can be in the zone after playing a single ball for that moment, or catching a catch. But you can't be on form until you've done it over a period of time and shown that something can be repeated. So that's sort of the difference.
Well, Pras is here, and one of my favorite sort of short pieces of cricket writing is the one you've written many years ago about him. Unfortunately, it's not in the book, but I'd like to talk about that, where you said when Pras was coming to bowl to you, and you talked about this wonderful sort of mental kind of battle you were having with the mental part of the bowler, and you were telling him, Pras, I hope you're bowling here, and I'm going to do this, and then you do this, and I'm prepared for this, and you had this sort of mental kind of a dialogue. Is that a common thing among batsmen?
No, I did feel that. I hope he felt it a bit too. But I felt I would put it the other way around. I felt it was more that he was coming up with these ideas of what to do about me, which wasn't not such a big problem for him. And I was trying to adjust to this, but then I might catch his eye, and he had very big twinkling eyes, and sort of the message seemed to go between us, you know. Well bowled. I can see that was very good bowling, but I managed to do this. And he said, well, yes, you did, but I'm going to do something else next ball. And there was a sort of, it was playful, actually. And as a matter of fact, it's also easier to be playful, in my experience, if the bowler concerned is not going to knock your head off next ball.
Yes, there's that lovely line in early in the book where you say when you were 10 years old and you were playing the fast bowler was, 17 or 18, yeah. And he was really fast, and then he bowled a slower delivery, and he said, I hoped that he would keep bowling slower deliveries And that feeling never left me for the next 30 or 40 years. Yes.
You know, to the question of national characteristics, which Suresh began with, and of course there are also sub-national characteristics.
Yes.
You know, Bombay batsmen play in a certain way.
Yes.
So Rahul Dravid may actually have been a Bombay batsman rather than an English batsman,
Yes,
in a certain sense.
yes.
Now, having the privilege of knowing you personally, apart from reading your wonderful books, I must say in confession that my first encounter with Mike Brearley was rather unpropitious for him. Because the first time I saw him play, Brijesh Patel ran him out for about 2 or 3. On 5. On a wicket on which you should have got 300. Beautiful. Okay. So, you know, having the privilege of... But Brijesh Patel was, dare I say it, a very un-Indian fielder because he could hit his thumbs in those days. Right. Now, to go back to sub-national characteristics, having had the privilege of knowing you, one of the discoveries in this book was that you're a Yorkshireman. You know, I didn't know you were a Yorkshireman because unlike that great Yorkshire opening batsman, well, also Len Hutton, unlike every great Yorkshire opening batsman, Herbert Sutcliffe, Len Hutton, and someone we shall not name, you do not... I mean, you're an extraordinarily generous person. Maybe that's the Gujarati influence on you, cancelling out the Yorkshire stuff, right? But, so...
I thought Gujaratis were the Yorkshiremen of India.
Okay. But then these are different kinds of Gujaratis, as you know. But you do share one English characteristic. So you may not be a Yorkshireman in your generosity, in your intellectual and other forms of generosity, unlike the various Yorkshire opening batsmen. You don't think you're the greatest batsman who ever lived, for example. You could praise other people. But there is one English characteristic you share, a very English which is on display through the book. And I'd like to, just repeat a couple of lines from the book to illustrate what I'm saying. The most famous thing ever said about Mike Brearley was by the Australian fast bowler Rodney Hogg, who said, he's the man who has a degree in people. He's the cricketer who has a degree in people. This, I think it is the most famous thing ever said about Mike Brearley, and incredibly accurate. But there's something else in this book which you discover. Long after Rodney Hogg said that, and long after the two of them have retired from cricket, Hogg invited Mike to a radio show in Australia, where he began by asking Mike, he said, you know, I just found out that you began life as a wicketkeeper. As Aditya informed us, he kept wicket for Cambridge. And then Hogg said, why did you stop keeping wickets? So Mike said, you know, I wasn't very good at it. At which point Hogg said, but you didn't give up batting. All right. Now, this is not a joke Virat Kohli or Sachin Tendulkar will tell about themselves. Or Narendra Modi or Jawaharlal Nehru would tell about themselves. You know, so I think this is one of the most appealing aspects of this book, apart from the wisdom and the understanding and the experience and the knowledge of life beyond the boundary, is this self-deprecatory humor. You know, and I think that is a very English characteristic. You may not be a Yorkshireman, proper Yorkshireman, but in this respect, you're a proper Englishman.
Thank you for all that. Yes, I'm a half Yorkshireman. I mean, my mother wasn't Yorkshire. And but your thing about generosity and hands in pocket reminds me of a story that is there in the book about Len Hutton, told by Alan Ross, I think, or about a conversation between Alan Ross and Len Hutton. And Len Hutton, he said, was a classical batsman, whereas Compton was a romantic. And he makes this beautiful contrast between the two of them, the great heroes of my early years, just after the war in England. And he said of Hutton that he never played an extravagant stroke. You know, extravagance was considered a sin as far as batting was concerned. You know, the thing was not to get out and was to restrict yourself to what could be done without risk. You know, the old story about Yorkshiremen never playing a late cut until June. You know, that kind of thing. And he tells this story about Len Hutton having not scored runs for a while, and saying it's nothing that a few runs, a couple of hundreds won't put right, Len Hutton said. And then Len said, as a matter of fact, I'd quite like to score a few runs just for fun. And Adam Ross thought, just for fun, Len? You know, well, how could that happen? And Len said, well, I'm a Yorkshireman, you know. I have bought a drink, but not very often.
Yeah. So, the two heroes of your youth, justly so, because they were the two great English batsmen of the 40s and 50s, Hutton and Compton. You have portraits of both of them. And you talk about Compton's great weakness, which was that, in modern terms, he was a racist, right? More or less. Conservative, more or less, right? Okay.
You don't need to be provocative today, right?
Okay, but I wanted to, the portraits on Hutton and Compton are, of course, very well sketched. But the one that is particularly moving among the English batsmen is David Shepherd, whom I think many people in this audience will not know about, because they know about Hutton and Compton. The few real cricket experts here would know about David Shepherd. But David Shepherd went to Cambridge, like Mike, captain Cambridge, captain England too, briefly. I think one or two matches. But then joined the church and became a bishop, and of course was very important in the struggle to have apartheid South Africa de-recognized. And it's a very moving portrait. I think you capture he clearly, he was not a cricketing hero of yours, but he was a kind of moral compass for you, in cricket and outside. So it would be nice for them to know a little bit about him.
Yes, well, he was a fine man. I think he was a bit of an evangelist at first. The first time I came across him, you came across me with Brijesh Patel, but the first time I met David, I didn't meet him, I heard him preach at St Mary's Church, Cambridge, the greatest St Mary's. This was it was in the very early 60s. It might have been 62 or 63, I don't know which year. And I was a bit nervous about him. It wasn't exactly hellfire, but it was, you knew where you stood or were going to stand. You know what I mean? It was it was quite fierce and Christian, and of course he's Christian, but I don't mean that. But it was sort of not exactly. It wasn't fundamentalist in any pejorative sense of discriminatory against anyone else, but it was kind of very at you. It was preaching fire from the pulpit, and I think he had some difficulty in learning to be more able to communicate with ordinary people and not to be quite so sure of those things, that sort of thing. And I think he became more human as he went along. He did say that when he played cricket for Sussex, it rained one day and they all went to the cinema. He said they entered the cinema in the order that they got their caps at Sussex. In other words, the junior player came in last, and got the worst seat. But he was, and I think it took him some time, and I think he said so, to become aware that people who didn't have a sort of Cambridge-type accent or education could be leaders in the church and elsewhere, and could learn to be very good at helping people and getting people to do things, but were often better in a group than they were one-to-one. That was an interesting thought, which I hadn't thought of before. So David Shepherd, but he was also, he was a man of integrity, he was very straightforward, and he would talk to people he didn't like who had totally different views from his. I like the fact that although he opposed apartheid South Africa fiercely and for a long time and articulately, and did very good things in that way, I thought, he, towards the end of apartheid, in other words, in the mid-80s, he was invited by Ali Bakr, the head of South African cricket, to go to South Africa and to see what the South African Cricket Board had done for cricket in the townships, in other words, in the black areas. And I thought, to his credit, because that was unpopular amongst all the people who'd opposed apartheid in sport, he went. He thought, well, I'm going to go and see what it is like and what they've done. And if I disagree, I'll say, and if I like it, I'll say. And that there's a sort of courage that isn't a narrow courage. It's a courage that's open to different people and to people with different starting points from his.
There's one story I remember reading about David Shepherd, which is probably apocryphal. It stars a Yorkshireman, Freddie Truman, and it's to do with, you know the story, so I can tell it to them. It's about, I think, the 62-63 tour of Australia, and David Shepherd had come back to cricket after a few years of just doing the church work. And I think he scored 100 in one test, but in another test, he dropped a couple of catches at deep fine leg of Freddie Truman. And when the second or third catch went down, Truman said, "Come on, Reverend, you have enough practice at keeping your hands together." Well, it's again a very English story. It's probably not true. It's probably not true. But,
It's a nice story.
yeah. But by the way, you were a great fielder. And I remember that catch you took of GRVC, of Underwood.
Off Underwood.
Yeah. That was something.
That was in Madras, Chennai. Madras, yes. No. Chennai.
You only remember the matches India won, but he remembers the other ones.
Yeah, I was thinking that of the two of you sitting here, of course, Ram is unmistakably, unequivocally the romantic writer, and for a long time I thought that Mike was the more sort of realist, more sort of straight, telling it like it is, and not quite the romantic. But there are aspects of this book especially when Mike is talking about his colleagues, his, players he's played with, and you realize that, or at least I realized that I was wrong. That Mike was a romantic too, and it came as a well, I won't say a bit of a shock, but it came as an interesting surprise that Mike is to be a really good cricket writer, you have to be a romantic in some way, and I think that's it's an important thing. It's an important thing for certainly cricket writers like myself. The sort of day in and day out, the columnists and the newspaper writers who are always shouting and screaming about something. To realize that it's I mean, Mike's been involved in cricket for over 50 years, 55 years now, and to still be able to write with that sense of surprise, sense of awareness of of the possibilities in the game. I think that's a wonderful sort of that's a texture of the book. That's a feel that one gets in the book, which isn't there so much in, for example, on captaincy, which is a straightforward, well, not a book of instruction, but a book of how shall we say, superior advice, expert advice, and I think that was my sort of discovery in this book, which I really enjoyed.
Oh, how nice! Well, actually, Mana, my wife, tells me that I'm better humoured and more good company if I have cricketers around than when I get all sort of over serious and all that kind of thing. But it is serious too. I mean, there's a very nice statement, that comment by the manager of Liverpool. What was his name? Bill Shankly, who said, "Some people say to me that cricket is a matter of life and death. Football is a matter of life and death. I'm very disappointed with that answer. It's much more important than that." And of course, cricket or football is of no importance compared. The outcome of a match, let's say, is of no importance compared with some tragedy that happens to an individual. But the institution of cricket and the fact that it's there is important. And the possibility of playfulness, the richness of the game, the fact that that it goes on, it can go on for a week, and you get no nearer winning or losing by the end of it than when you started. That sort of thing about cricket, and the fact that as Praz said to me just now, that when we played cricket, he said something like he thought the bowlers really were interested in the long-term battle with a batsman, how you can trick him, how you can defeat him, where his weaknesses are, where that sort of overall long-term planned, ideas, possibilities, reactions by the other person, those kind of things that happen both individually and between teams, they seem to me a wonderfully rich mixture, offer a wonderful. So yes, I'm very happy about cricket.
No, because we do tend to use words like the batsman committed suicide.
Yes.
It's a tragedy. India lost by 20 runs. It's a tragedy.
Yes.
As Keith Miller said, I mean, tragedy is a Messerschmitt up your backside. He didn't say backside. He said something else.
Yes.
But you get the idea.
Yes.
So I think what happens quite often is you tend to lose a sense of perspective.
Yes. Yes.
I mean, this is swinging the other extreme. You know, you think that Virat Kohli getting out is the end of the world, and,
yes.
and
Yes.
you need to have perspective there.
Yes.
So it's good to be aware of the extremes.
I mean, it's a bit like what you said about romantic and I don't know what the opposite of romantic is. Is it Puritan or classical?
Well,
Puritan,
I
think.
I actually use the word hard-boiled, but that's in
Hard-boiled.
the restricted sense of writing.
But actually, of course, as with many of these dichotomies, one needs both. I mean, and actually everyone has some degree of both. I mean, Compton was an exotic batsman, flamboyant batsman, who did things that very few other people could do. But it was all based on a very sound technique, obviously. The same is true of Peterson or other people who bat or bowl flamboyantly or romantically, one might say. But I suppose the other attitude is more the Yorkshire attitude, that the first thing you've got to do is not get out, and of course that's important too. You can't do very much from the pavilion, so there's something to be said for both.
I love the story you have in the book about Len Hutton talking about the Yorkshire attitude. I know we're talking a lot of Len Hutton this evening, but it's a lovely story. When Gooch was in 300 plus, batting on 300 plus against India at Lord's, and Hutton had 364, which was England's highest score, and with virtually every run that Gooch made, Hutton kept smoking these cigarettes, and he smoking them, dropping them. And apparently his wife told him, "Listen, Len, if Gooch gets 365, they'll focus the camera on you. Please smile and look relaxed." Terrific.
And then Gooch got out, fortunately for Len and the world at large, and for Lady Hutton, and for 333. And apparently Len leapt up and said, "He's a wonderful batsman. He's a wonderful player. What an innings! What an innings!"
Well, I think on that, maybe it is a contrast between personalities and countries. The only time I saw Gary Sober's live was on the telly, not in the flesh, unlike Pras, who's bowled to him, and you played with him in county cricket, and Suresh has probably met him in some dressing room or the other. This was when Lara broke his record. He walked onto the field.
That's right. Yes.
And incredible grace. I mean, he was quite happy to see that record. He didn't care. He didn't care.
I agree. I'm sure that's right. And everything he did was graceful. He walked gracefully. I mean, let alone bowling and bat. He was a wonderful fast medium swing bowler. A bit like Stark, not perhaps quite as quick, but very similar, accurate and fast, and swung it in. And they called him the 4-in-1 because he did that. He bowled orthodox, he bowled Chinaman googlies, and he was one of the greatest batsmen.
And a short leg and a slip fielder.
A wonderful short leg and slip fielder.
But I remember that gesture when he happily
it's
walked
very
and
nice.
gave the record.
I agree. It's very generous and nice. I agree.
Do cricketers of earlier generations think, Richie Benaud, for example, I think was an exception, because he specifically wrote about this, but do cricketers of an earlier generation think that the following generation don't enjoy cricket as much as they do, tend to be more serious about the game, don't look at the fun aspects as we were talking about earlier? Is that something that's inevitable, or?
Yes, I think it is, isn't it? I mean, I hear it from people I've played with that the modern cricketer isn't this or isn't that, but actually, I don't know many of them very well. But the ones I've met seem just like the rest of us, And I mean, I think the difference is this whole shorter and shorter matches that they also have to learn to play. And they also play very well, of course. And I've nothing against them, by the way, except that they're pushing out and leaving too little room for Test cricket. That's what worries me. But it's not the game itself, which I like. And I think the skills of T20 cricket are quite extraordinary, the way they can hit the ball, the defensive reactions of the bowlers and so on. I think it's a good game, and good for people to watch, but not all the time, and not as much as the other. But the difference is, if you play, well, actually the good difference is that English players will play with Indian players, with Australian players in the same T20 team in India, and they will realise that the others have feet of clay like themselves and have sense of humour and are human beings, and some of the unpleasant sort of labelling of other countries or nationalities or religions or whatever it is sort of falls away when people get to know each other in that sort of way. So that's the good side of it. I think the difference is that if you play, for example, if you played county cricket when I did 6 days a week with a game on the Sunday, say, of one-day cricket, but the other games 2 to 3 day games, you'd have 2 evenings in each place, and you'd have a drink with the other side, or you'd have a chat with the other side, you'd get to know people in that sort of way, you'd talk shop. There'd be a lot of talk about cricket, and I think probably Praz would have felt the same thing. Whereas I'm not sure, now they're sort of racing off from one place to another for the next game. They're a bit more, they're more earnest about the coaching. They have, you know, each team has 5 or 6 coaches, 3 or 4 masseurs, 2 or 3 dietitians, a couple of psychiatrists, you know, and there's, you know, they've all got to get a word in edgeways too, let alone the coaches.
They have to justify their salaries.
To justify their existence. So I think it can become a little bit more dry in that way. But I think
that's true, because I remember in the early days when I started out, we used to travel for Ranji Trophy games on these long train rides, and some of them were 2 nights and 2.5 days and stuff like that. And it was wonderful because the youngsters would sit at the feet of Pras and Vishy and all these senior cricketers, and that was the education. The Indian Railways did the job of the National Cricket Academy those days, and it was wonderful. It was really wonderful.
Very good. Very good. I mean, I suppose. Sorry, I'll say one more thing. Yeah. The bad side of that, of sitting at the feet of these people, is that until you'd played sort of 10 years for England and 15 years for Middlesex, you were supposed not to have an opinion in the dressing room. Whereas I think the more there is a shift towards something a bit more egalitarian, yes, which is a good thing. Yes. I mean, because you never know where the next good idea is going to come from.
In your book, Mike, I mean, one of the aspects of the book is, of course, one of the sections which really could have been written, I suppose, by no one else who had captained a country at cricket, with the possible exception of Sangakkara, is the section on race. That's a deep and profound meditation on racial divisions in cricket and outside. But I'm not going to. My question is not about that. It's about another section, which is about an aspect of cricket that is greatly neglected or underappreciated, except by bowlers, which is wicket keeping. It is said, there's this famous story about which actually, has Len Hutton again as one of the characters. When Len Hutton was knighted in 1956, Australia were touring, and it is said that I think Arthur Maley, the Australian leg break bowler, was covering the tour, went to Len Hutton and said, "Congratulations, Len, but I hope next time it's a bowler." The last bowler to be knighted was Sir Francis Drake. Now, bowlers are generally underappreciated, which is why, for example, I wrote a book about bowlers called Spin and Other Turns. I didn't want to write about the batsmen. But even less appreciated than the bowlers are the wicket keepers. Yes. And that's, your section on wicket keeping is brilliant. Okay. Maybe because you want one such a good wicket keeper yourself.
But was one. But was one.
But was one. Exactly, precisely, but was one. Unlike Suresh and me. You recognize what it takes to be a high quality wicket keeper. And, for example, your chapter on Knott. Knott was a truly great player. As a batsman, in that, in that quixotic way, in a very un-English way, marvelous keeper to Underwood, to fast bowlers. Yes. And it was striking to hear from you that he has not got any of the birthday honours from the Queen. But, wicket keeping is, say Syed Kirmani, whom you also briefly mentioned, and whom, of course, Pras played so much with. I think we've just Dhoni is remembered for his sixes more than for his wicket keeping, and I mean, just the effort day in and day out of. So tell us a little bit about your experience with keeping and the keepers you've admired.
Well, what was I going to say? I mean, Alan Knott, I thought was the best I've seen, really. Oh, I know what I was going to say. I think that wicket keeping is the one aspect of the game that's definitely worse than it was.
Okay,
that's one thing.
I would agree.
Because
I would agree.
In those days, you'd pick someone because he was the best wicket keeper, and he would be able to stand up to the wicket to great spinners, and he could stand up to wicket to fast medium or medium fast bowlers when it was needed or helpful, and they would often be real pros, real professionals. They would be no show, they would do things discreetly, you'd hardly notice them, but they never dropped the ball. And they would take things on the leg side, and they were craftsmen, and they were skilled in their own right, and if they scored a few runs, that was a bonus. Yeah. Whereas now you want people who are athletic, who can catch standing back, who can rush up to the wicket quickly and score quick 50s or 100s.
You have a colourful vocabulary to boot.
And have a loud voice and a colourful vocabulary, yes. And otherwise they're not very good wicketkeepers. We don't want them in the team. I mean, that seems to me what the main thing I want to say. But Alan Knott, he was such an individual. I mean, he would sometimes say, people criticised him for catching the ball with one hand and not two, when he might have caught it with two. I mean, standing back, I mean. And he said, but he'd worked it out, that actually in many of those positions, if you try to do it with two, you're more likely to drop it. Yeah. So it wasn't a showmanship. It was that he thought that, and he would, so that he really did things his own way. He batted his own way, though he said he wouldn't have been allowed to bat that way if that hadn't been his second string. Because people would have said this is outrageous, it's not proper. It's almost like Ranjit Singh, and it's unchristian, that sort of thing. Because he did extraordinary things. I mean, he played an innings at Bangalore in 1977 where we lost that match. We won 3-1, by the way, just to let people know. But he played an innings in the second innings when we were losing on a pitch that took a lot of spin. Praz, you were playing, I think. Bishan was playing, Chandrasekhar was playing. And he scored about 70 odd not out. And I remember him hitting Praz over extra cover, and I remember hitting Bishan over mid-wicket against the spin. He swept, he cut, he did everything. Strokes you couldn't imagine anyone playing on that pitch. I mean, it was a sort of pitch where you did well if the whole side got 150, say, So he was a minor genius. I think he didn't get an honour for two reasons. One is he was a wicket-keeper and not a batsman, and the other was that he was considered to be by people in the British cricket establishment as not quite proper too, a bit unchristian. He did these things. He wanted to take his wife and child for most of the tour to Australia rather than leave them at home and have them come for 2 weeks over Christmas. And they didn't. They thought, this person laying down laws to the great cricket establishment? It's shocking. So I mean, Alan Knott is one of my heroes, actually. I didn't put him in that section because I was going to have a section on wicketkeepers. But
I'd say, I'd kind of agree with you, what you say, that's one aspect of the game that has probably declined. My favorite keeper of the last 15 or 20 years, just in terms of how neat and immaculate and efficient and correct and understated he was the Zimbabwean Tatenda Taibu, who then became a priest.
Did he?
Yeah. He left early. He was the one. He
He led at 21. He was
he at 21. Yeah. He was one.
Gosh.
But it is, and as you say, I mean, it's an aspect of the game that I'm so glad you have that section, because you wouldn't. I mean, apart from your first-hand knowledge, I mean, people wouldn't think of a whole section on wicket-keeping.
Good.
They're more likely to think of a section on fielding than on wicket-keeping.
Interesting. Yeah, interesting.
It's also interesting. I mean, it's completely unconnected, of course. Is that I suddenly realized as I was reading the book that I was just 1 degree of separation from Jack Hobbs, whom you met when you were very young. No, the question I wanted to ask was the captains who you looked up to, the captains who influenced you when you were very, very young, and obviously a future captain of England. Who were the captains?
It wasn't very obvious at the time, but anyway.
Everything is
happened.
obvious in retrospect.
Yes, that's right. Well, the people I most admired at that time were Ray Lingworth, Keith Fletcher, Ian Chappell, probably Greg Chappell to some extent, partly because they were all very shrewd. I mean, Ray Lingworth was an extremely shrewd captain. I mean, he said of me, someone said, was I the best captain of England? And he said, best, he said? Luckiest, rather. And that's in the book too. Luckiest?
Luckiest.
Luckiest, but luckiest. Seems to be all about Yorkshire, doesn't it, this talk? Anyway, but Raymond was, and I once, Raymond, he was an off spinner and a decent batsman and a good fielder, and he was very shrewd. And I once, Leicestershire, whom he captained, had 4 spinners, 2 off spinners, himself and Jack Birkinshaw. He bowled close to the stumps like that. Jack Birkinshaw bowled like that, and 2 left armers. One was someone called John Steele, David Steele's brother, who bowled from about extra cover, if not. And the other was someone called Balderston, who played football for Carlisle, and he bowled almost from his right ear. So he pointed out to me that these 4 spinners landed the ball, in different lengths and totally different lines. So he would look at a pitch. He wasn't just looking at a patch of rough stuff just outside the... He was looking at a patch of rough stuff for Birkinshaw, for him, especially for him, for all of them. So I always went, and I even bought him a drink or two to get him talking about captaincy. And I admired Ian Chappell. I mean, he was a bit of a rough diamond, and probably still is a bit, but he always talks good sense. He's generous. He's very tough, but he's very shrewd. He's also, the Australians, they've sometimes had a bad press. They've sometimes deserved it, but not always. And we talk about sandpaper and so forth, but and they were great people. They didn't walk ever, but in other words, walking is if you've hit it and you're given, and it goes to the wicketkeeper and there's an appeal. The English would hypocritically walk when they were 53 or 127, but not walk when they were 0 or 99. Whereas the Australians would do the same thing all the time, but never walk. But there was a match at Melbourne against England where Chris Old got him out for 50 or 60, caught at the wicket by Alan Knott off his thigh pad down the leg side, and then the second innings, Tony Gregg got him out exactly the same way for 65. Times when he was going to go on and get 150 or whatever, and each time he got off the field without the crowd or people knowing that he'd been, unjustly just given out. So he just marched off. He said he had a few words with Tony Gregg on the way, but he kept walking.
Tony Gregg isn't in that list.
No.
He
probably isn't. He didn't walk much.
No, I'm saying in the list of your favorite captains, because I remember you're writing many years ago. I was in school, and the line has stayed with me. And I wonder if that has something to do with this, where you said that Tony Gregg gave the impression of a man who would fight with his grandmother for the last nut on Christmas Day.
On the cricket field.
On the cricket field.
But actually I did have time for Tony Gregg, and I thought he was an extrovert. You noticed him on the field. He had big gestures. He had a lot of generosity as well. He once said to me, actually, after that run out of Rajesh Patel at Delhi in the first match of the series, run out for 5.
It's still hurting.
It hurts terribly. It was a perfect pitch, as you said, and I was in excellent form as well. And I ran myself out for 5. Anyway, now I can't remember.
Brass was dropped for that match, which was also
That's
happened.
right.
Yeah, unfortunately.
So it would have been much easier to score 150 than otherwise.
He was dropped for the wrong reason, but we'll
We'll leave that aside, shall we? Yes. This was about, I've lost track of it. Tony Gregg. Yeah. Oh yes, he said to me some days later, he said, when you ran yourself out, he said, I felt like crying. Oh. That's quite something, wasn't it? Probably not only because he thought I was going to score 150, but generosity to me.
He was captain.
He was captain.
He wanted to win the match, yeah,
but he was... So, and he was somebody also you could say things to. You know, if you didn't agree with him, you could say it, and he would listen and take it on. And he might not agree, but he would listen to it, and he didn't take offence. I remember him bad-mouthing Larry Gomes. You remember Larry Gomes, the West Indies number 5, batted between, or number 4, batted between Viv Richards and Clive Lloyd. Yeah. You know, and it was important because he was nudged singles and gave them the bowling and stuff like that, and didn't compete with them. He came in as a young player for Middlesex. I was batting at the other end, and Tony Gregg gave him too many, in my opinion, too many mouthfuls about he couldn't bat and this, that, and the other thing. A bit too loud, a bit too up his face, in his face. And I said to Tony, I thought it was going over the top. He didn't need to do that. He said, you're quite right. Yeah, so there was a good thing about, there were many good things about him, many good things.
1 minute. We will have a question session.
Should we? Well, we should probably open up soon, shouldn't we? Maybe not. Well, shall I answer?
Yeah, please. Now that
I had a very... I said the wrong thing about Clive Lloyd in the book on captaincy, which some of you got today. I said something like, I thought he was a very good captain of a very good team, the West Indies, and he brought people together from different islands and so on in a great way. But that when he didn't have such good bowlers, I didn't think he was tactically a great captain. And he was very offended by this for many years. I don't think he talked to me for a long time, but we've got back to good terms again now. And I think that was a bit sort of arrogant of me to say that, probably not quite right, and a bit over the top. And so anyway, so that's him, all right? Imran, I think, was in a way a bit similar. I mean, I think he was a charismatic captain. He carried the team, a great example on the field, a great cricketer, got better and better, especially after helmets came in, we always reckoned. Ian Botham would bounce him out, but could hook him, you know. So, but he became a better and better batsman, as did Richard Hadley, by the way. Also a great all-rounder. And I thought he was, I didn't think he was a great tactician. He's only the Prime Minister now, after all. He's got a minor job on his hands, with that little country to the north of you.
If I may just say a couple of things about the two people Navroz mentioned.
Yes.
One was about Imran Khan.
Yes.
You know, Javed Miandad, in his autobiography, where the words are not his, unlike your book, which is written by yourself, but the thoughts, I think, are his. He had a good ghostwriter. He says in that about Imran being overrated as a captain. He says something very interesting. He says, Imran and I both captained Pakistan, I forget, the same number of tests. We both had 13 victories. Every time Imran was captain, in every one of Imran's 13 victories as captain, his best batsman was playing, meaning Javed Miandad. Right? No. Then he goes on to say, in my 13 victories as captain, my best bowler mysteriously reported unfit on 7. Yeah, of course.
That was him.
Yeah. So I think that. But one story about Clive Lloyd you must allow me, because Pras is here. Pras won't remember it probably because he was playing in that match. This is the 74-75 series here, where the West Indies won the first 2 tests, we won the next 2. You know, Pras and Chandra essentially won, and G.R. Vishwanath won Calcutta and Madras. It was the last match in Bombay, 2-all. The first day, beautiful wicket, and West Indies won the toss. And early on the first day, Lloyd hit a straight drive and broke Bishan's finger. All right. So we were 1 bowler down. He was 100 something not out the first day. The story is about the second day, and I was watching on television in Delhi as a student. Lloyd was 113 not out. Bishan was not there. And the second new ball was taken. And in those days, as you know, we had a non-violent opening attack. So Eknath Solkar was bowling. You know, Eknath Solkar, great fielder, really courageous batsman, but bowled at about...
Used to get boycott out, you know.
I know that. But this is Clive Lloyd, it's not boycott. So at 130 or something, Eknath Solkar came into the new ball, just one, and he bowled, ran and bowled on Lloyd's legs. Lloyd flicked him for 6, like this, early morning, first to second over. And I was watching on TV, and the camera focused on Lloyd. He flicked Solkar for 6 and opened his big mouth and it. He started for a yawn like that. So that's the kind of batsman he was. Sorry.
There's another wonderful story that I want Mike to tell you. In that, not a lot of us know, I didn't know myself, that there's one batting record that Mike has which is superior to Don Bradman's. And I'd like to share that with you.
Yes, I've got a lower percentage of ducks in Test cricket than Don Bradman. But unfortunately, something went a bit different after that.
That's wonderful. Open it up, maybe?
Okay, we'll now throw the floor open to the to questions. Yeah. Let me sit straight so I can see all the angles.
I think, yeah. The mic will go down. Suresh will call you.
Yeah, this question is, my name is Rohit. My question is to either Mike or Ram. What's gentlemanly about cricket today?
What's gentlemanly?
Yeah.
Well, I am just a bystander.
Okay.
He was, what was the council you were head of? What was it called? The ICC something or the other?
No, the MCC, World Cricket Committee.
World Cricket Committee, so he has to answer.
Okay. So, Mike, I can't see a situation or an instance like when Vishwanath recalled Taylor when he was not out happening in today's cricket. So is cricket really gentlemanly today?
I think the decision review system has improved player behaviour. You don't get so much hypocrisy that I was talking about before. You don't get so much bitterness between teams, which leads to accusations of cheating, which leads to further cheating. I think there's a better attitude in international cricket in that way than there has been at times in the past. So I thought that was an extremely generous act of Vishwanath. And actually was rather damaging to India's prospects as it turned out in the match. But I don't think it was something I would have done. And in fact, the Australians would certainly not have done it. And I think that it in a way, you see, it shows up the umpire. I mean, I'm not in the slightest bit critical of him, but it is a fact that it shows up the umpire. And the umpire is asked to change the decision that he has given on what he saw as a result of somebody standing and making a bit of making it clear that he hadn't hit the ball.
But the DRS makes it worse.
Well, I don't agree with you. Makes it better.
No, but it shows poorly on the umpire.
No, well, the funny thing is, it's not being shown up in the unexpected course of play. It's something being put right that wasn't right, that you may well have been a good decision in terms of what was available for the umpire to see, but the camera can see more, and the umpires like it.
I think,
top umpires like
I think there's one difference between the Vishwanath incident and today, which is linked to Mike's answer, which is that you have neutral umpires, which you didn't have in those days.
That's right.
And I think someone should do a statistical study. Sharda is here. You know, I've long wanted a statistical study of cricket, international cricket from 1877 till whenever neutral umpires were introduced, just of LBW's home batsman versus away batsman. That's all. Yes. Just compare them. And because I think, you know, the English, I mean, have been hypocritical about one thing, and that's their belief. Now, there are no neutral umpires, so they can't have that belief, that their umpires were better because they umpired county cricket, they had 6 days a week, and so on and so forth. And I don't think that was always true. I mean, there was a match, I think, in which Mike was captain, 1979, when Gavaskar got a double 100. And I remember at the end of the series, Gavaskar saying, umpire David Constant, always constant for England.
He said that.
He said that. And there were a couple, I mean, this may be a bitter, acidic remark, but I think the fact is that, you know, Indian umpires, absolutely. I mean, there's no question that some of them would always give the benefit of the doubt to an Indian bowler. There's absolutely no doubt about that. I remember one incident personally, which happened in Bangalore, and I can name the umpire. This is Martin Crow's last test overseas tour. Truly great batsman. And I had flown in from Delhi to watch him because I thought, you know, I'll never see Martin Crow again. And he started beautifully. He hit Kumble for a couple of fours, and I forget who else was bowling. He was about 12. And then Kumble bowled a googly, which bounced and hit him here. On the leg stump outside, he was given out. He walked off the way Ian Chappell did, strumming his bat like a guitar. You know, because he was playing, you know, against a home crowd. This was in 93 or 94. 12 years later, I met Sanjay Manjrekar for the first time. And I said, I saw you at that match. And I remember Martin Crow's dismissal. And Sanjay Manjrekar laughed and said, umpire Bansal. Or, he remembered the umpire who gave the yeah. So I think the DRS with neutral umpires, I think has certainly made for a much fairer and a more transparent game. And that's the main difference.
Yeah, I think DRS, I mean, however fair it is, it's taken away the role of the umpire to large extent. But the thing is, now we are limiting the DRS to 2 reviews or something per innings. So it becomes like a poker play, like, I mean, should I review, not review? You know, it's not there for all the decisions. I can't review, right?
Yeah, nothing's perfect in life.
I've got the mic. I just want to remind everybody that this whole topic came up whether Mike is romantic or not. He is, because I was witness to his romance with Mana first. And I can vouch for that. Mike, I want to ask you something that some months ago we had a conversation about cricket in Ahmedabad. And you had said that today a lot of school grounds in England are taken away by corporates and by the builder, you know. I think that same thing is happening in India, and we are losing more and more cricket grounds. Can you please tell us a little bit about that?
Well, not much more than what you've said, except that there are 2 things that worry me about the future of cricket. One is what I mentioned about Test cricket and therefore 4-day cricket in different countries being pushed to the fringes by T20 domestic leagues. And the number of them, the money that people can make from them, the speed with which they can make the money, the time they take up, the way that tours are now compressed into very small spaces. Home teams almost always win. Not always, quite. Adelaide there was a few days ago, I believe. India won a match. But still, the point is, that's the first thing. The second thing is the decline of cricket in state schools or ordinary schools. Obvious, the one I know about is England, where now children have far more opportunities of choices of things to do. They have far more mobile phones and so on. And as you said, as I said to you, the grounds have been sold off. Playing fields were sold off for financial reasons. Teachers don't want to put in extra hours to do what you do with these young cricketers in your group. So I think it's worrying, that the percentage of people from private schools called public schools in England playing for England is something like 40%, but the percentage of people who go to those schools of the whole population is something like 7%. I may get that wrong, but it's something like that. I mean, so yes, it's what can one do? I mean, there are people who are trying to do things about it. There's quick cricket of a kind that people are introducing into primary schools. The MCC is doing something. It's trying in 40 different towns. It's got hubs, which are places for good cricketers from state schools or without these privileges, who the best are picked out, and then they are given a chance to play on on public school, private school nets and grounds and conditions, get coaching, and also put in touch with local clubs. And a few of the girls and boys, and a few of them will become and are becoming, potential professional cricketers, but a lot of them will at least take up cricket and continue it and become better than they would otherwise have become. So people are making efforts, but it's like I don't know, it's like a bit like King Canute and the waves.
So it's often been said that Ian Botham wouldn't have performed as well without your captaincy. So tell us something about the role of captaincy and today's situation with all these coaches and various other assistants. Has the role of the captain declined?
I think it has a bit. I think it's also declined because, with central contracts, we're talking about international cricket, probably you have that in mind. With central contracts, people are tied up with the international team most of the domestic home season. So someone like Joe Root hardly ever plays for Yorkshire, and it's true for the rest of the England team, most of them anyway. And so there's no chance he has of becoming captain of Yorkshire. I mean, Yorkshire would be stupid to make him captain. I mean, they never play for them. So people become captain of England without ever having captained anyone, in some cases, or hardly. So they haven't learned. It's a trade. I mean, it's a job. It's a skill. It takes a lot of learning. I mean, hopefully you get better at it, as I think he is doing, as a matter of fact. So, and I've got a lot of time for him. I think he's got the makings of a very good captain, and may well be there now. I don't know, but he's anyway. So yes, I think that's true. And as for the coaches, it was extraordinarily, in a sense, amateur when I started playing. I mean, the Middlesex would have a coach, but he wouldn't coach the first team players, really. He'd coach the second team players and hope to provide people who come into the team to be, good cricketers who knew how to go about things. But he wouldn't directly say to the first team players, no, that's totally different now. They'd have batting coach, bowling coach, fielding coach, may even have a wicket-keeping coach, but that's probably the last thing they'd have. And the coaches have to earn their living, or they think they have to by saying things. And so one person will say one thing, another. So it's rather confusing. And I think it's very difficult for the captain. I mean, on the other hand, if you had a coach that you got on with and you respected, I think that would have been a wonderful thing to have. Someone who said to you, you're in charge on the field and with the team, I'll help you with the backup and help the selection and help the organisation of the nets and get people in the right place at the right time, and I'll have some ideas and help with the coach, the physical fitness side and so on. But you're in charge of the cricket. That would have been terrific, to have someone that who really knew the game to help and talk to about it. I mean, like having Suresh and Ram would have been, what a privilege.
Russ, did you ever have a coach?
No.
Did you need one?
In fact, when I took the side in 1985 to Australia, I was the manager, I was the drink carrier, and all in one. So there was only one person, I was the manager. So we never had any other coach, not even someone to attend to our physical fitness or if there's an injury, So you have got to, someone has got a groin problem that has to heal on its own. There was no one to sort of look after that. So all one-man shows. Those are.
Once Sir Don Bradman received a legitimate delivery which rolled on, which Sir Don applauded with respect. In 1970, a test between India and Australia, Bill Lawry received a similar delivery from Prasanna, which rolled on, and he hit it across the boundary for 4 runs. What is your opinion about this?
I don't know. I don't blame either of them. I wouldn't blame him either. But I mean, he says he wouldn't blame Bill Lorry. He never blamed Bill Lorry. He had a good sense of humour, Bill Lorry.
Mike, I have a question.
Excuse me, one more please. In a close test match between England and India, which you were captaining, what was going on in your mind when Gavaskar completed double 100 and India was inching towards victory? And also, what was your feeling when you took his catch and you got him out? Which was the turning point?
No, I didn't catch him.
It's got a mid-on.
No, somebody, it wasn't me though.
Not you. You would have been at slip or something.
Yeah, someone or something like that.
He chipped someone to mid-on.
I don't think it was me.
I thought you took the catch.
I don't think so.
Captain, but what were your thoughts when he was scoring that double 100? And
Well, I'll tell you the back. Can I tell you the little backstory to that?
Yeah.
That on the Sunday, this was Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Monday, Tuesday, rest day, Sunday. On the Sunday, Man and I invited both teams to come and have lunch at our flat. And Mana cooked, vegetarian, she cooked a meat dish for beef stroganoff she cooked. Sorry, I shouldn't mention that. That was completely accidental.
I believe that.
And she cooked a vegetarian dish too. And we were talking, and Sonny hadn't scored many runs on that series, and his wife was there, and various other wives were there, and most people were buying. In those days, you couldn't get a lot of things in India that you wanted, and they wanted. People were buying washing machines and sets of crockery, and not only saris but also other things of usefulness. And I said to Sonny, is there anything you were thinking of getting before you went home? And he said, yes, I've got one thing in mind, he said. He said, that was 100 in the second innings. And then the bugger went and got 2. Anyway, my thoughts were, and for quite a long time, Mike Hendrick was off injured, Bob Willis was off injured. We didn't have many bowlers. We had Botham and 2 or 3 spinners. And it was a flat pitch, and Gavaskar played beautifully. And I thought we were going to lose with about 15, say 5 overs to spare, or 8 overs to spare. And they only needed about 60 with 6 wickets left, 7 wickets left, with plenty of overs. And actually, India changed the batting order. Yes, and instead of Vishy. It seemed a rather odd thing to do. But anyway, it could easily have won the match as well, but still. And it ended up India 8 runs short with 8 wickets down. It was a great game of cricket, but I thought we were going to lose. It was 5-1 or 3-1. I don't know.
It is said that Ian Botham, who had played with Sunny in, that was the next year. But he went to Sunny and said, I dreamt you'd get a double 100 today.
Did he?
Yeah, I think that's
on that day.
On that day, he's been reported that.
I didn't know that story.
Somebody had a question.
I had a question.
Yeah.
So, when we played cricket as school kids, there were 2 things which intrigued me. One has been resolved, and I want your view on the other one. The one that has been resolved is it was almost sacrosanct for the captain to give the new ball to a fast bowler. And I used to wonder why wouldn't he give it to a spinner depending upon the batsman's weaknesses, the weather conditions, the pitch, and so on and so forth. But of late, we've seen that that's become increasingly common. So that mystery is solved. But there's one more. The batting is always opened by what's considered a conventional opener. And what we find, again, depending upon pitch conditions and so on and so forth, that these wickets, precious wickets, are lost very early on. So why don't, in certain circumstances, captains open with the weakest batsman?
Reverse the order.
You lose what really doesn't matter to you. You get the shine of the ball, and the pressure that the bowler currently faces towards the last few overs.
Yeah, actually, that's sorry to interrupt you, but that has happened in Test cricket. Bradman sent us 10 and 11 when they were playing on a wet
on a sticky wicket in Australia.
Australia, 36-37. When they lost the first 2 tests and won the next 3, and that has happened.
No,
yes.
in white ball cricket now, you don't find batsmen coming down and actually facing the pressure towards the end. When the real pressure is there, you have bowlers batting.
No, but that's. It does happen. It's not. Can we keep the questions short, please? Because
I'd like, if I may take the privilege to ask Sharda, you should come in. Kuch bhi bolo. Can the mic come here? We have India's finest sports writer here, and I'm not going to waste that chance of getting Sharda to say something.
No. Other than the sort of advertising Mike Brearley's books, I was just wondering. What I wanted to ask you, Mike, is, how has captaincy changed with this vast number of formats that you have? Is test captaincy harder to captain? You would assume it would be harder to captain. Or does shortened format cricket require you to be thinking quicker, faster, responding? How good a T20 captain would you have been, you think?
I think I'd have been all right. I think... they are different. It's different tempo, isn't it? I mean, the worst thing about captaining in a 4 or 5 day match is when you're really up against it. The temperature's 38 degrees, and the other side are 320 for 2, and don't look like losing a wicket, and you've been all out for 150. I mean, it's a very, very grim situation actually, and it goes on for a very long time, and you've got to bat again as well, and they're all going to be coming in, rushing in, and bowling very fast, etc., etc. So. The skills of the game are just the same. There's still a hard ball and someone running in and ball. And you still have to try and think of the things that the opposition would least like. That's what I don't think that question is formulated enough by captains. What would the opposition least like amongst all the possibilities I have, or we have? Go on, you carry on.
No, the question was also sort of, sorry to just interrupt, is that that was the problem that MS Dhoni seemed to have, that he was an exceptional one-day captain and he was just an average-ish test captain, particularly outside India where, it's unfamiliar. And
I can't really comment on him, but on the general point, I suppose some people are temperamentally more attuned to short games. I mean, in terms of captaincy as well as in terms of playing. And I suppose that somebody would be bold and quick and would make quick changes, as indeed Virat Kohli does in all forms of cricket. But he would make it, admirably and boldly in very short matches, and might get bored in long matches, or switch off, or not keep that long-term game against the batsman. That with all the another thing I think is very important to the captain is to help a bowler and the fielding side, his own side, to think of different possibilities, or to countenance different possibilities. With off spinners, for example, that I captained, John Embry in particular, I could say to John Embry, look, we're going like this, we haven't got anyone out, you're bowling a bit defensively, a little bit flat, a bit straight, how about trying it a little bit wider, a bit higher? And he would sort of often not want it. But then I'd say, well, all right, we'll carry on your way a bit, and then you try that. Now, that's a very small example, but... So a person who plays in a long match has time to encourage people to try things against a particular player, on a particular pitch, in particular circumstances, and especially if you've tried other things and it hasn't worked. So I think it's temperament, I think it's... But there's no reason why somebody shouldn't be equally good at different forms of the game. I mean, one of the great things about Kohli, and I think I got this phrase from you, Suresh, didn't I? Was that he made a bridge between all these different forms of batting so that he could, as a batsman, he can play proper cricket shots in all forms of the game, average 50 in all of them, score at, 95 runs for every 100 balls in T20, 85 in one day, probably 55 in test matches. I don't know what the figures are, but he can do all of those things. And Joe Root's a bit like that, not quite as good, but a bit like that.
But on the same point, yes. Joe Root doesn't captain the England one-day team, though he plays for it. Yes. So somewhere someone thinks that Morgan is a better one-day captain.
Or that it's too much for him to take on, and let him just play in at least those matches. I don't know which it is, but I think Morgan is good too.
Yeah. at the back. I'll come to you. Oh, sorry. Go ahead. Go ahead.
In your
we'll come.
In your introduction, you were told that you were holding a position of a psychoanalyst. I'm very curious about that, and what is that role, and what do you do with that?
You want a short or a long answer? Well, psychoanalysts are people who try to help other people understand themselves better. There was a famous psychoanalyst called Wilfred Bion who said that he saw his job as introducing a patient, a person, to that person with whom he will have most dealings in the course of his life, namely himself. And I think that sums up in a sentence what one tries to do.
And what is the interface with cricket then?
Well, I mean, I think that it's continuous with ordinary human relations, that actually a good parent tries to understand what the child is getting at, let's say a small child, but also an older child, and tries to help them to tolerate things, to understand themselves a bit better, not to fly off in this direction or that, to help them with tough love, which I think a leader, captain, has to have. In other words, you have to be on the side of your team members, both individually and as a team, but you also have to be willing to say things they don't want to hear. Tough love.
Just one question, Mike. I just want to know what techniques you applied to motivate what called Iron Botham in that series in 1977, the Ashes series, when Botham, 81 yeah, about 81 series when he performed so well, both with the bat and ball. I mean, you must have told him something when Botham was able to perform far above his abilities.
I told him a lot of things. Actually, it comes back to the last point. Toughness, saying things people don't want to hear, and on the other hand, encouraging, supporting, being empathic to people. And I thought with Ian Botham, the thing I could do with him, partly because I was his first England captain, so he at least looked up to me to start with, was I could say to him, with batting at Headingley, go for it. You're much better off trying to hit the ball than trying to play like a proper, respectable Christian batsman, like a boycott or something. Hit the ball. Swing your arms. Be the village blacksmith. Which is what he, in principle, was as a batsman. And so I gave him full license for that. And at the same time, I said to him when he was bowling, look, I took him off after the first 3 overs he bowled in that match. And he said, I can't bowl in 3 over spells. And I said, I can't bowl you if you bowl medium pace half volleys. So, I mean, and that stirred him up, and he ran in more. And, I mean, there were various other things I said, like, I realised in the year that I hadn't been playing with him, he wasn't running into the crease and bowling flat out. He was sort of running up slower. He was stepping in at the last minute, and he had an exaggerated sort of sidestep to try and swing the ball. So I said to him, I called him the sidestep queen, which he didn't appreciate. Anyway, so with him, I could tell him things that he didn't want to hear, but which motivated him. But I could also give him his license.
Mike, I've got a question. You were clearly famous for handling very mercurial talent of your time. How would you have handled someone as mercurial, as talented as Kevin Peterson, if you were captain today?
Well, one doesn't know, unless you try, because people are people and you have individual relations with them and you get on or you don't, or you can say this or that, like I could say to Ian Botham, not that he was the slightest bit like Kevin Peterson, but, I could say things to him. And there were other people I didn't get on with so well, or didn't make. Anyway, Kevin Peterson had a lot of good qualities, but he also had some not such good ones, including, the idea that it had to be him who was in the pole position, and he had to be able to go and bat at the number he thought he should bat at, and he was he would say things that were a bit silly, and people would take the mickey out of him, but he didn't quite get the joke and stuff like that. And England, I've said before, the English, as you in India may, over history, have noticed, have a tendency to hypocrisy. Perfidious Albion. So we say one thing and we do another. And, I think that the England team, which makes a great deal of difference in how the team responds to an individual who's awkward is extremely important. And the team were very good with, let's say, Geoffrey Boycott. The team that I had were very good with him. And, in a good way, recognizing his good qualities, how important he was to the team, but not letting him elevate himself onto a pedestal too far, So I think the team became a bit snide, if you know that English word, a bit sort of undercutting to Peterson, but not quite up front. I think the Australians would have been better with him.
Yeah. You had a question. No. Yeah. Go.
With test match audiences dwindling, do you think the test championship next year will start drawing crowds? Because other than England, I think no one comes to watch test matches nowadays.
Test matches? Yeah. No one comes to watch them?
Other than England.
Yes, exactly, that's right. Well, he's more or less right. Yeah. Oh, it's very worrying. And I think it can only be saved by a transformation of attitude of the boards of control for cricket and the ICC, that they don't just think about how much money they can make, but they think about the value of Test cricket and how you market Test cricket. You make it comfortable to go and watch. You can go and get a seat that's reasonably comfortable. You can have proper toilets. You can have marketing of players as Test players as well as IPL players or whatever. So I think there's a lot of work that the countries could do about it. But I think we should hear from the... Come here. No, what just
no, your years as captain of a cricket team, did it bring about some changes in you as a person? Yeah. And if yes, would you like to identify one or two?
I wouldn't mind sending the question back to you. It's a very good question. It's a difficult question. I think on the good side, I think I could become more direct as I went on captaining with people. I mean, sometimes that would have rough edges to it, which I wasn't particularly proud of. Or, I could get too angry or too critical or something like that. But I think I could be a bit more direct with people as a result of it. I think I did I tried to put into practice the idea on a cricket team of really listening to what anyone had to say. Because as I said before, you never know where the next good idea is coming from. And secondly, people's own sense of their own standing is improved if you're interested in what they have to say. Someone in charge is interested in their point of view and encourages it and encourages them to speak it out. So I suppose those things did, alongside all the other things that are happening in my life, they did probably happen a bit. You better ask my wife, I think. Don't know quite.
I have two questions. One coming from the gentleman, what he was saying about Ian Botham. We read in India that Ian at that time was involved in some drugs and used to have very frequent pub fights, etc. Did you have any role to wean him away out of all these things? And we also read that you had developed father-son relationship with him. So that's one question.
He called it grandfather-son. I think, as a matter of fact, I think that during the 1981 series, and I'd sort of forgotten this till someone told me about it, that series where we had those remarkable matches, and he had that terrific turnaround, and I came back. I think he was awaiting trial for, like Stokes, Ben Stokes, for some sort of violent altercation outside a nightclub somewhere in... And where did he come from? He played football for... No, I think it was that... What? Scunthorpe. Anyway, the point is, I didn't help him with that, I'm afraid. I wasn't very near Scunthorpe at the time. And I think it was... No. I mean, I think the main answer... But a lot of the things that happened after I stopped playing too. I think he got more difficult later on, Ian Botham. That's one thing to say. So I had him when he was at his best. I think that I don't really think I thought I could do much about it, except just by ordinary friendliness and collegiality with him, and just ordinary human relations. You know, it wasn't that I had a policy or a plan or put in place things that. I mean, now I thought what should happen with Ben Stokes, by the way, is that there should be someone who's a kind of minder for him, you know, who goes around with him late at night and tells him, you know, enough's enough. One punch is enough, for example. Yeah.
So my second question is, irrespective of English team which you captain, who are the two best bowlers and two best batsmen, according to you, that you have interacted? Not only during your time, but even later on.
No, I can't go into later on, really. I mean, I can't compare these people. I mean, I think Virat Kohli is as good a batsman as I've seen, I think, probably. But in my time, the bowler I most admired was Dennis Lillee.
There's a lovely portrait of Lillee in your book.
Yes, there's a portrait of him. And I did think at the time that he was the best bowler I played against. He was fast, he was hostile, he was accurate, he swung the ball away. He could bowl just as well at 6 o'clock in the evening as at 11 o'clock in the morning. He gave his whole, you know, effort for the team. Viv, probably, Viv Richards. Most dangerous batsman anyway. But there were others, like Greg Chappell was a very fine player. Gavaskar was a very fine player. I don't know. I can't quite manage that.
I must tell you, just before the question, I must tell you a little story about Viv Richards. I had written recently, a few months ago, that you know, Viv Richards is the kind of person who Michelangelo would have loved to, you know, do the statue of David, etc. And he wrote back to me. He said, "Thank you very much, Mr. Menon. I agree with you."
Do you have his email address?
I have a question, and that relates to the recent spate of sports persons using performance-enhancing drugs. There is a lot of hue and cry about it. In various areas of sports it is there. And there is a world agency which is taking fairly stiff steps to combat this particular thing. Do you think... do you think there is time for its introduction, that is anti-doping or anti-drug policy in the field of cricket?
I don't really know. As far as I know, cricketers don't take performance-enhancing drugs. And what's more, it would be harder. I mean, what sort of performance-enhancing drug would have improved Praz's bowling? I mean, you know, he didn't need to become more excitable, more strong. He didn't need to be. It was all in the mind, wasn't it? And I mean, and it was all, and his skill. I mean, so cricket goes on. Let's say it goes on for 5 days. Performance enhancing. I haven't really heard of it. Maybe I'm just naive.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. That's wonderful session. I hope you enjoyed it as much as we have. Thank you very much to Mike and Mana. Welcome to Bangalore, and goodbye.